over the next few weeks, this new affection took over my life. It was a greater affection for this man, this man named Jesus than it was for alcohol. There was a greater affection for this man Jesus than it was for women. It was even a greater affection for this beautiful man Jesus than even for gymnastics. How do we replace the idols of our heart with new affection? We replace our affections, the old affections, with a greater, more passionate affection in our life. And as I said in my last message, the Scottish pastor Thomas Chalmers preached a great sermon in 1819, The Expulsive Power of a New Affection. And it shows that the only way to dislodge one affection from our heart is for it to be pushed out and replaced by a new and stronger affection. He writes, in a word, if the way to disengage the heart from the positive love of one great and dominant object is to bind it in positive love to another, then it is not by exposing the worthlessness of the former, but rather by addressing to the mental eye the worth and the excellence of the latter, that all old things are to be done away with and things can now become new. So I'm calling this the principle of a greater affection. And I wanted to give some illustrations of this just naturally from my life. And one that comes to mind was in 1972. So in 1972, I'm in high school, ninth grade, and I go to a PE class. And at PE class, the way it was back then, I don't know if it still is now, but back then you went through different sports. So we had a period where it was volleyball, and then we had a period where it was basketball, and then we had a period where it was flag football, things like that. So the phys ed teacher was always teaching us some new sport, and we came to wrestling. I didn't know anything about wrestling, couldn't have cared less about wrestling, and I was thrust into wrestling matches with guys, sometimes almost twice as big as me because I was so little. There weren't that many that I could wrestle at my weight because I only weighed 95 pounds. I was really good, and I didn't even realize how good I was. I was very strong for my size. I was actually very strong for anybody's size because I was taking on guys that were maybe 50 pounds heavier than me and beating them. And so it just so happened that my phys ed teacher was also the wrestling coach, Coach Chonko. I remember his name was Coach Chonko. And so he came up to me after about 10 of these matches where I just did really well. I didn't even have any moves. I didn't even know how to wrestle really very well. But that was part of the class, was he was showing us, a half Nelson. He was showing us how to do what you call the banana split. But I still remember some of these things. But I kind of caught it really fast and enjoyed it. So he asked me then to consider coming out for the wrestling team. And I think the idea of having a kind of a uniform with Clarkston wrestling on it, I think that's what really appealed to me. I thought that would be cool to have a sweatshirt I could wear. I'm this kid who's really got no identity. I think it was 8th or 9th grade. Here was something that gave me identity, got into it, and really became good. And over the course of the year, I think I had 72 bouts, both on the JV and the freshman team, because they kept moving me up and down, as well as in the PE class, and nobody defeated me. So it was crazy. I was crazy good at it. It was awesome. So I thought, well, maybe wrestling's what I want to do. Well, it's 1972. Well, 1972 was the Olympics, and the Olympics came along, and I started watching gymnastics on TV. And I got so enthusiastic about gymnastics that it was like, what's wrestling? I just forgot about wrestling, and I went into gymnastics, and for the next 8 years was a committed gymnast instead of a wrestler. So it's an example, though, of it wasn't so much that I thought, well, I think I could be better at gymnastics than wrestling. I don't even remember ever thinking that. What I remember is I want to do gymnastics. I was engulfed in kind of a revival of a greater affection. I quit wrestling, went into gymnastics. New coach came the next year who was a gymnast at University of Georgia and actually a really, really good coach. And so he began to work with me, and I became, a gymnast for the next 8 years and went on to college with a scholarship for gymnastics. But it was a greater affection. So that's what I'm talking about, is that it wasn't so much that I began to say to myself, I really like, wrestling, so I'm going to stick to wrestling. It was more that this new affection came. And I think a lot of things in our life are like that God's wired us a certain way, and the greater affection takes over. And I'm not talking about, I want to just be clear and say I'm not talking about feelings. It wasn't an emotional thing. No, it might have been at first. It might have been at the very beginning. But it was more of a growing conviction of a greater affection that was more important than a lesser affection. One time, I'm in Japan on a mission trip. This is 1982. And then we go to China. And we're smuggling Bibles into China. And this blonde-haired gal comes up to me from UCLA. Her name is Liz. And bam, I was just captivated by her beauty. And as I got to know her through the trip that we were on, I realized her inner beauty too. So her outer beauty caught my eye. Her inner beauty really captured my heart. And suddenly, from that day forward, and then for the next 3 years, my letter writing, my thinking, my phone calls were all around an affection, new affection that I had in my life for Liz. So you could say that I fell in love with Liz the first time I saw her. A lot of people say that, and you're like, yeah, right. But I think it was true that I was attracted to her almost immediately, and then 3 years later, we were able to get married. And but it was a new affection, a fresh affection in my life. Now here's my point. I suddenly disciplined my life. If you'd have said to me, I want you to start practicing 3.5 hours a day, 6 days a week for the next 4 years of high school and then 4 years of college in the sport of gymnastics, when I didn't know anything about gymnastics, I said, you're crazy. There's no way I'm going to do that. I'm not going to do that in any sport. And yet the new affection drove me to a discipline that confounded in any and in every way how I used my time, because the new affection was what I was in love with. And it was the same thing with falling in love with Liz, is that I began to think about her. I began to be powerfully affected by her. And so what followed were these convictions and this discipline in my life. Well, my freshman year at the University of Georgia, I got injured. Really, a friend of a friend took me out for lunch and then out to this grassy hill at University of Georgia, and he opened up a little mustard-colored booklet called The Four Spiritual Laws, and he shared with me that God loved me and that God had a wonderful plan for my life, and that Jesus died on the cross for my sins. He shared with me that Jesus rose on the third day from the dead, and that his power could come into my life, and that if I would put my faith in him, if I would put my trust in him, Jesus would come into my life, save me, but also restore the true creation for which I was created by Christ to be, that the true identity that was mine. And so after a few months of thinking about this, one day I went into a little chapel at University of Georgia. I gave my heart to Christ. And all I can tell you, men and women, is it's like suddenly, over the next few weeks, this new affection took over my life. It was a greater affection for this man, this man named Jesus, than it was for alcohol. There was a greater affection for this man Jesus than it was for women. It was even a greater affection for this beautiful man Jesus than even for gymnastics. That's how we break idols in our heart. We break idols in our heart by discovering a new affection and going for it. And so what I'm going to talk about in the next episode is I want to talk about the principle of a greater affection and how this works spiritually and emotionally, mentally, even physically in our life. So I'm going to give you 3 thoughts under the rubric of the principle of the greater affection. And let me give you a little bit of a teaser for the next one. Here's my thesis. This is my thesis. The only way to be free from a sinful affection is to replace it with more passion for a holy affection. Let me say that again. The only way to be free from a sinful affection is to replace it with a greater passion for a holy affection. The only way to replace an old affection is with a new one greater than the former one. So in my next episode, I want to talk about how to do that in your life.